out there. So we're going to have to cut somewhere. We're going to have to shrink government. It's the right thing to do. Yes, it's hard to see people crying and whatever the Democrats trot out, but it needs to be done because we can't fund all these programs.
John, but a lot of Republicans don't like what they see in this budget either. Again, they don't like it when the money gets taken away from them.
Exactly, and that is why we have such a bloated government and such a bloated deficit. Gary B is right. Look, when interest rates go up, and we're servicing something like $1 trillion on our debt at 8 to 10 years, whenever that's projected to happen. Think about spending $1 trillion on education. That is a total waste of money by reckless politicians since Andrew Jackson. If you take out 100% of the discretionary spending other than defense, you still have a deficit right now. So you're cutting pennies right now. We need to be dealing with dollars. The problems we have right now are entitlements. Going after discretionary spending may look good, it may throw red meat to a base, but it doesn't accomplish much of anything.
But Jessica, why weren't the Democrats afraid when our defense spending fell to 3% of our economy under President Obama from about 5% in 2010? That is our national defense and security, but that doesn't bother them, but cutting public broadcasting does.
It's a little bit more than public broadcasting, and we were still spending, I think it's 8 times than any other country on our defense spending. Listen, I'm someone from the left side who thinks that there are places we can cut. I know that there's extra fat in every single department, but Donald Trump did not put out a budget that touched defense, homeland security, his principal issues, and I do understand that. But that doesn't mean that he isn't taking away from key programs. And it's not just Meals on Wheels, making it that we just stand around and say, oh, what about seniors? You're talking about community block grants to HUD, for instance, 28% out of the international affairs budget. That's something that's getting Marco Rubio incredibly upset. A lot of GOP hawks as well. So when you have Republicans and Democrats saying that this is dead on arrival, you better listen.
Well, that program that Jessica's talking about, Jonas, we've spent since the mid-70s about $150 billion on it, and it never really targeted the poorest communities. If you don't start cutting somewhere, you will never cut.
Well, they're cutting the Appalachian Republic Commission. That's been since Lyndon Johnson. It's still poor in Appalachia. But the bottom line is, we're getting the minutiae of things. It's not a lot of cuts because the budget's basically the same budget spending in total amounts as it was under Obama, adjusting for inflation. And the fact that it's even this little a cut is amazing because of all the heat he's getting from both sides. There are Republicans who are using scare tactics because the defense budget, one of the few parts that does go up in this budget, isn't going up enough to humor some people who think we're not safe either. So with all this pressure from both sides, unfortunately, we're going to probably see a final budget that isn't going to be a reduction from last year's spending at all. In adjusting for inflation, it might be an increase again, because at the end of the day, we're probably never going to see discretionary spending going much lower than it is now. And it's not that high relative to historical levels. We're going to have to direct the real problem towards the lack of revenues to cover these programs and the entitlement spending. This, as John said, this is just not. There's nothing you can do here. Look at the heat that's created over a very small change in the grand scheme of our discretionary spending.
Gary B., people on the left and liberals lost their minds this week because the National Endowment of the Arts and the National Endowment of the Humanities were eliminated. So maybe we don't fund a Hamilton, which, by the way, nobody could afford to go see in the first place.
Why is there never a national endowment for athletics or sports? I always wondered about that. Shouldn't that be a place up there? But the point is, yes, anytime you make a cut in this budget, and this is more a problem with what goes on in D.C., someone's going to scream and yell. Look, you had what should have been a unanimous cheer from the right saying, oh my gosh, we're finally cutting the budget, we're getting back to some of Reagan's principles, and everyone, as even Jessica pointed out, from Rubio to everyone on the right, if it affected their backyard, they were having a fit because the currency in D.C. is power and it's money. You can't cut from my budget, you got to cut from somebody else's, but someone else is saying the same thing. That's the problem. We need to completely restructure government somehow so this doesn't become a power play every year or 4 years. And Jonas is right. It's really all academic. until we start tackling entitlements. And my gosh, Trump and everyone else is so far away from that, it's scary.
But Hadley, well, I want to point out, though, that they are trying to tackle the entitlement of Medicaid, and this potentially, again, if you can prioritize and decide what is the role of the federal government, then you actually might be able to tackle the big picture problems.
Well, that's absolutely right. That's the key. We can't accept the premise that if the federal government doesn't do something, that thing will cease to exist, whether it's healthcare, education, or entertainment and the arts, our cultural programs, our community programs. Some of these things should be left to the private sector, but some of these things, states should have a big role, and that's the case with Medicaid. So states can take back some of their authority and regulatory oversight when it comes to the benefits and eligibility in the Medicaid program.
And John, I'm going to give you the final word on this, but in his first budget, Ronald Reagan went after school lunch programs in the cuts and even arts funding, and I don't think people remember him as Darth Vader.
No, they don't. Anytime you cut billions of dollars, you're going to hurt somebody. There's no other way around it. And when you talk about states and Medicaid, they're cutting $370 billion out of Medicaid. They're passing that on to the states. The states simply can't afford that. They're just shuffling the deck chairs is what they're doing right now.
Not the way they do Medicaid right now.
That is how they're doing Medicaid. They're capping it and they're passing the burden down to the states.
But they can change the Medicaid program. They can reform the Medicaid program.
Final word to you, Hadley.
Well, I was just pointing out, if we stick in this sort of status quo way of thinking about things, especially when it comes to health care programs from the government, no, we can't continue on this path. We got to change things. We need reform, not just cuts, but real reforms.
And then we can wait for the granny off the cliff ads to come from the Democrats.
Exactly.
They're coming pretty quickly. You won't have to wait long.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks, everybody. Cavuto on Business about 20 minutes from now. Charles Payne is in for Neil today. Charles, what have you got?
Hey, Dagan, the Fed hiking rates again and promising more hikes are coming. Now, some here are saying that all these hikes could throw cold water on President Trump's plan to heat up the economy. Plus, the White House renewing threats to cut federal funds to sanctuary cities. As we find out, the U.S. now has nearly 500 of them. Time to make good on that threat? We're going to debate it at the bottom of the hour.
Thanks, Charles. We can't wait, but up here first. Forget President Trump's leaked tax return. Are Americans more concerned about their own returns? Is any relief in sight?
This is not an emergency nor something unforeseen. It is something we will have to confront in the coming years and decades.
The mayor of Catania, Sicily, is on the front lines. Sicily is a major entry point for migrants rescued at sea. Over 100,000 have come through Catania in the last couple years. This city has buried many too, and has taken pains to give them dignity in death. Sicily is a seafaring place with a tradition of welcoming visitors. The mayor of Catania is extremely proud of this part of the cemetery. It's a monument to 17 of the more than 100 refugees who arrived in this city already dead. The tombstones bear the verses of a poem written about the perils and loneliness of migration by sea. The journey for the survivors from here is a hard one too. They are battered. Many get beaten along the land route before they set sail by gangs and traffickers. Many of the women get raped. They often come to camps like these before continuing journeys northward to other parts of Europe.
I'm humbled by these young men and women that come here because they do this trip and there's just that hope, the hope of a new life.
This woman works with unaccompanied minors who arrive in Catania.
Most of them think that here in Italy it is possible to become a great soccer player, so they think they can go to play for our football clubs like Milan or Juventus because of, I think this is what they see on the television. Others want to learn how to make pizza.
It's been said the migrants seek work, they dream of working, and are willing to do jobs Italians don't want to take. These African men who came in an earlier wave of migrants like to see themselves as a sort of example to others. They got tired of picking oranges for $25 a day, so decided to set up their own business. They said they have lots of cows in Africa and know something about yogurt, so started making it. They say they are not stealing jobs, they are creating something and paying taxes, contributing to Italy's economy, and hope now to be